Imagine what it'd be like if we were really curious about each other.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Relational Spirituality, the weekly podcast of largerstory.com, the podcast that sees all relationships as spiritual and all spiritual formation as relational. Now, here's your host for this week, Crabb.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Relational Spirituality, brought to you by Larger Story. Check us out at largerstory.com. I am your host today, Crabb. We've been going through the 7 questions of spiritual theology, fancy name there for those questions, that Dad came up with several years ago. And what my dad used to say, the late Dr. Larry Crabb, is he would say that these are categories to really think through life in. These are things that if you're not working in one or all of these areas, there's these questions, you're really not doing anything that really has perhaps eternal significance. We've gone through the last question. The first question of this year was question number 1, who is God? And we're going to start to dive into question number 2 today with what's God up to. And let me just catch everybody up to speed real quickly with the 7 questions and what they are. The first question of the 7 questions of spiritual theology is what we said it was. It's number 1, who is God? Number 2, the second question is, what is God up to? Number 3, who are we? Number 4, what's gone wrong? Number 5, what's God done about that problem, about our problem, what's gone wrong? Number 6, how is God's Spirit moving today? And number 7, how do we join in the Spirit's movement? So I'm here today, and we're gonna wrap up hopefully question number 1, and then we're gonna begin question number 2. But I'm joined today by 2 guys who I've had the privilege of walking closely with for the past 2 years. One of them a lot longer than that, but the 3 of us together have been journeying together for the last, what's it been, guys? 2 years, 2.5?
Going on 2 years, yeah.
Going on 2 years. So we meet once a week for about an hour, and we've done this now for going on 2 years, and we just connect and see what the Spirit chooses to do with that time that we spend together. And it's really been amazing to be with these 2 guys. So let me introduce you guys today. We've got Glen Urquhart and Lee Hummel. Guys, thanks for joining me today.
No problem. My pleasure.
Great to be here.
After all the technological issues we've had to get to where we are now, we're good to go.
Yeah.
So some of the things that I was thinking about as we're getting ready to do this episode today is we've been meeting for 2 years, and we've had some really incredible times, I think, that have really been Spirit-led. And I don't want to get ahead of the game here, but how does that kind of thing happen? What's happened just as you guys start to think about the little group that the 3 of us have been part of for the last almost 2 years now, meeting, and I don't think we've missed a week, to be honest with you. I really don't think we have. What's going on in that group? Why is that group seeming to be moving in a direction that seems to be really working at some level to change us in some way? What are your thoughts on that?
Conversations that matter. That was one of the earliest phrases. Is Larry Crabb and I became friends 23 years ago, or was it 24, something like that? Conversations that matter. And I found that, yeah, I'm not just tired of, I am starved by conversations that don't matter. God spoke us into existence. I want to be part of that conversation that continues, the echoes of his speaking us into existence. And I think that's what happens in our Tuesday morning time together. Real conversations, real connections. Your relationship sometimes is messy.
Yeah. I think
and I just say one word underneath is, for me personally, a lot of surrender, a lot of abandonment, a lot of letting go had to happen before I could really have those conversations and be part of them that I wanted so much to be part of. And I've had some addictions in my life. That's a whole other topic. But the one that I still struggle with is the lust for significance, to not to put too fine a point on it, but to be my own God, to decide what matters and to pursue good things. So I think there's been some abandonment.
Lee, what about you, bro?
I think for me, it's, again, going back to one of Larry's phrases, looking bad in the face of love. Am I willing to do that? And how deeply am I willing to do that? Am I willing to confess to you guys just how screwed up I am, confused I am, how dark I can get sometimes, and I'm able to do that with you guys, and nobody's getting up and running out of the room like their hair's on fire. And I think for me, that just makes a huge difference. And you start building a relationship like that. And I think that can happen quickly if you're willing to do that. I've spent a lot of times in the Psalms, and that's part of our heritage. Those guys are just getting right down to it, how screwed up they are, how disobedient they are in their hearts. And I think that's just key. I think that's part of the Psalms are leading us into a willingness to do that with each other.
Yeah.
And there's a trust there. You guys can do that with me. I can do that with you. And like I said, we realize that there's other parts of us that aren't that bad. But there's this part that I want to get rid of. And if I don't talk about it and confess it, this is just going to sit there. I want to walk out of that part. And I can't really do that unless I'm talking about it in a healthy way.
It's fun to introduce you guys a little bit to the Larger Story people now as we're doing this podcast today. And we're talking about what's God up to, because I think that as we've journeyed together for the last little bit, that you start to be aware of what's God really doing and how is that movement really happening. Because I've had a chance to see it in both of your guys' lives. I think you've seen it in mine to some degree. And as we've journeyed together for the last couple of years, you see what God's maybe up to. But I think as we dive into that second question that we're going to start to talk about this month, as we begin February, where do your guys' minds go just as you start to think about that? We've talked about who is God. He's a perfect community of three.
Right.
And he wants us to have that kind of relationship with each other, which is only possible through the Spirit. And then sometimes we even doubt that, but we know that is possible. And I think we've had a chance to touch on some of that. So as we dive into what's God up to, where do your minds go initially?
I think just going back real quickly to who God is, I think that's a question that grows and involves, at least for me, how seriously do I take him? Who is he? So we talk about he's the God of community, but he's also this majestic, transcendent, holy God of Israel. And, how seriously do I take him in being obedient? And I think that sort of that's a process for me. Initially, when I was in school, I did a paper on who God is, and I was thinking about it, couldn't come up with anything except for maybe Sunday school answers. And I started to reverse engineer, how am I really living as a window into how am I looking at God? And I came up with, in large part at that point in my life, I was the guy who had the one talent, and you're a hard man and you reap where you didn't sow. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to wrap it up and stick it in the ground and wait till you come back and give it to you because I'm scared of you. And I think that that's not who he is, but a lot of times that's how how you live your life says more about who you think God is than necessarily what you're thinking at the time.
I love that. I love that, Lee.
So to me, that's an ongoing process of trying to not take what's happened in my life personally to the point where God can't really love me if this continues to happen in my life. How do I rectify that? How do I deal with that? How do I hold on in the midst of really lousy circumstances? And your dad's books have done a great deal to help me do that. They really have.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And it's interesting because we all have stories and our stories are so very different. I know your guys' stories well, and you guys know some of my story. And it's just amazing how important it is to understand the relational component. I think if there's anything that we could use to distinguish what's God up to, what's he up to now, I think it has to do with how we relate somehow.
Yes.
It's got to have something to do with that, because he's not making our lives work very well. You guys have sure proven that to me as mid-70-year-old guys. I'm a mid-50-year-old guy working with you 70-year-old guys, and I'm thinking, I thought it was supposed to get easier.
Yeah.
Oh, come on,
Really?
man. Everybody's supposed to be getting along better. My wife likes me more or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys have proven to me that sometimes that ain't the way it works.
No.
But so how do we really understand the relational component of what God is up to now? And I think that's what our little group of three has started to dive into in a little bit of a unique way, which really brings me hope and excitement. And you guys have been so encouraging to me in the last few years, just that we've done that. And just to tell you guys who are watching now, this was shortly after my dad passed away. We did the summit at the Cove, which was just a honoring of him and remembering him a little bit. And we had a great time. A bunch of people were there. And after that, I felt called, and I don't usually have this, but I felt led to get a few guys together to just start to walk with. My mind immediately went to Glen, and then we had another guy join us, and he dropped out after a little bit of time. And then Glen talked about you, Lee, and I had known you, and I thought, let's do it. And that's been 2 years later now. That the supernatural kind of leading of the Spirit led me to want to just put this together. And I know how valuable and important these kind of things are. Lee, I know you do, given
yeah.
if you're a recovering alcoholic and you've been
Right.
involved in some of that stuff, and the
Yeah. It's
importance of community, the
yeah.
importance of relationship, where you can actually look good or look bad, excuse me, in the presence and the face of love.
Yeah.
Yes, when I met Larry, like probably so many people, in the context of crisis, our daughter had attempted suicide. Larry threw the book Shattered Dreams.
Yeah.
Because my dreams are shattering. As we got to know each other, came to love each other, we found that we had shared yearning. We longed to know God, for oneness with God. We longed for something that we could taste but couldn't get on this earth, but that it was good to be brothers and friends longing the same direction. And I think that's happened with the three of us.
Yeah.
We yearn for oneness, connection, belonging that we can't have on this earth, but we can walk along with each other in a way that you share the yearning. You don't feel alone. You don't
Love
feel
that.
crazy.
I love that word walk too, Glenn. Walk along with each other. It's what you were
Yes.
saying, Lee, about
Yes.
it's what you're saying. It's what you're doing. And if
Yeah,
you're wondering
yeah.
what God's up to, or what's going on, and that kind of leads into who are we, but it's all together. All these
It
seven
is. Yeah. They keep coming. They
all
keep,
these seven questions are just blended together because of
Absolutely.
who God is and because of what he's up to and because of who we are. We have the opportunity to partake in that glory that God talks about.
yeah.
And obviously, who God is in theology proper is a huge question that theologians can't comprehend. And every child knows. It's in that tension. It's obvious to a child, and theologians can't put the words around it. I have said to myself, it's gone through my heart, probably daily for decades, Yahweh, I am the great I am of all existence, the verb to be of all verbs to be, the sheer being of God, the source of everything that is and was and is to be, including me. And I long for oneness with God. I long to participate in the glory that Jesus said in John 17 he'd already given us. Not glory in the sense of affirmation, adulation, praise, but glory in the sense of the capacity to bear weight. Much of life is hard, as we've shared with each other, with struggles with children and other family members. But to walk together, to not be alone, is to experience some of the oneness that Jesus said was his prayer, his goal, his end, if you will, for us. And I think we've experienced a little taste this side of heaven. We've had some appetizers in the oneness.
And to the point where, I do whatever I can to not miss this time. It's a highlight of my week to interact with you guys and to process through what's going on so that I don't get gunny sacking with all the junk that's going on. But just, I was thinking, and this is a nerdy thing for me to get into, but talking about the relational aspect of God, and I don't know why this attracted me, but it really did. So I'm just going to get a little bit nerdy here, but there's 640 times in the Old Testament the word Father is used. 8 of them are capital Father. In the New Testament, 350 times it's used. 250 times of those are capital Father. So God moves from the Old Testament to the New Testament to a whole different relationship with us. And there's a real intimacy there. Now, Christ is imminent. He's with us. But then God was doing that too. All of a sudden, it's 70% of the time the word Father is used in the New Testament. It's capital God the Father. So he moves into this new relationship with us that's really, I think, crucial, that he wants to be related to us in that way. He's transcendent, he's mighty, he's in the Old Testament, but the New Testament, he becomes a father to us. He becomes a parent, and it's a whole different kind of relationship. And I think that's difficult for me to deal with sometimes because I had a really difficult time with my own father.
Yeah.
But I think I've got to remember he has made a major shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament as far as how he relates.
And what's the distinction? Because if you look at the Old Testament, especially if you go to Isaiah 6, where Isaiah had a vision of the throne room, and the angels had to have their wings covering their face, and no one could look at the Father. He was too magnificent. You can't. But then all of a sudden, in Revelation 4 and 5, now everybody has eyes all over their heads. There's 24 thrones surrounding this throne that's in the middle, and who's sitting in the middle of the throne? The Lamb.
Yeah.
Sounds like Daryl Johnson is right here with us.
I love this. I mean, that's actually got me excited because that just is more evidence of all the crazy stuff that we start talking about when it comes to end times and what's
well,
happening.
even Yahweh that we don't know how to pronounce because the Jews were so determined to respect God by not saying his name. But we have no clue. We have the Tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He.
But let's not get off on too many rabbit trails here because we could go anywhere we want to go. But
well, what I was going to say is it flows into the second question: what's God up to?
That's
eschatology. He's up to relationship.
Yeah.
He's up to oneness. He's up to us sharing in his glory. He's and I'm struck by the core of the good news. The core of the gospel is seeing Jesus, seeing the Father by seeing Jesus. That the greatest good isn't what God does for me or even how he transforms me in his image. It's that I can see the greatest being, the greatest good, the most perfection. I don't have the words for it, but it's seeing Jesus. That's what he's up to. That's his purpose. And somehow we're to be one with the greatest being, the greatest good, the source of everything.
Yeah.
And that's the question. I think that's the biggest question I go to with what's God up to is just what you said there, Glenn. We're to be one with what's God up to. So how do we get into that rhythm and follow? Because I think what we've done, you said it, Leah, just a second ago, you've made this a priority. You've made this group, this little 3-man group that we have here. Glenn, you have as well, and I have as well. We haven't missed a week. Some days don't work out because of whatever, but we've usually put another day in that week that we grab that hour to get together with each other. We've made a commitment to that's sacrificing at some level, and also it's something that's intentional.
But it's also a lifeline. It's also, it's our spiritual oxygen.
Yeah. And when you guys talk about coming alive, there's times when I'm so focused and this stupid phone rings and I'm like, it shakes. I'm just so intensely focused and feel so alive when we're talking about these serious matters, conversations that matters. It's like you said, I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, but it's so much more powerful than any of that junk that I did back in the day. Just having this connection with you guys, and we're dealing with some hard stuff, and we're showing some not very pleasant parts of ourselves at times. But I think we all realize that we're all in process. We don't want to be stuck in those places. We don't want to be walking in those dark things, and we want to get out of them. And we're trying to help each other do that.
What does it look like to be committed to this? That's what we've done. Why do small groups always, that's not the right word, but oftentimes end poorly? Or someone's gotten their feelings hurt, or in ways that you know.
And even if nobody got hurt, they end with a lot of shoulds and oughts. And now if it's a men's group, we got to guard our eyes and let's hold each other accountable. And there's a place for that, but they end with rules, not relationship.
Right.
We've never had an agenda with the three of us met from day one. We've never said, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's what we're going to read or study. We just get in and go. And it's been amazing to see how, as time has gone, especially in the last few conversations we've had, the spirit has just been palpable in terms of movement.
And for me, I mentioned earlier that I met Larry maybe 24 years ago. At that point, with our daughter who attempted suicide and was at Nenworth Meyer, and met him through a book and called him up, and that led to a wonderful relationship of sharing each other's heaviness, sharing our longing, our mostly unmet longing to be one with God.
Yeah.
And you guys, of course, know that our son died suddenly 4 years ago. There was another crisis where, both of you separately, not in our conversations, but helped me through that. But there's abandonment. You can't control somebody dying.
Right.
You can't fix it.
Yeah.
You can't fix your own feelings. Grieving is unplanned and not organized. And yes, there's grief share, and there are people who care and help and walk you through. But surrendering is a big part, I think, of what God's up to. And it's hard. But for me, that was one of the things Larry emphasized before he graduated, was that he was delighted in, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but that I was surrendering more and more. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of what our relationship is. And our relationship is just a tiny appetizer, a foretaste of abandonment, surrender, and complete oneness with the Father. I think
Yeah.
that's what he's up to.
And that kind of gets,
Even allowing death and painful things.
Yeah.
But they drive us together. They drive me to him.
Yeah.
and that kind of gets back to who is God? How am I going to trust him? Am I going to trust him in the midst of this horrible circumstance? Does he really have my best interest at heart? Does he really have that? Does he really want to father me and love me? And I think that's really difficult, and it's over time. And I think with my background, I tried every spiritual thing I could think of before I finally came to Christ. And so I've got this background where I know this other stuff doesn't work. And
Yeah.
when I think about that instance where Jesus is saying, you need to drink my blood, eat my flesh to be part of me, and everybody's woo, everybody's leaving. And Jesus looks at the apostles and said, what about you guys? And in essence, to me, Peter says, we're not too thrilled about that either, but we know that you're the only way.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of times where that's all I got left is, Lord, I know I'm not too thrilled with who you're appearing to be right now, but I know for certain that you're the only way. And I've got to find a way to hold on. And invariably, after a while, things become to get clear that this is what he's up to. But initially, I'm like, I think about that question, what's he up to? I'm thinking, a lot of times he's up to a bunch of stuff that I would never do if I were God.
That's the understatement of the day there. Millennium. I don't know.
But he was up to allowing our son to die very suddenly.
Yeah.
And that was a rescue for Rob. And it was a blessing to me.
Yeah.
Your mercy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
So amazing to hear you say that, Glenn. That's
Yeah.
just everything you were just both you guys were saying. I'm going to go back to what you said about abandonment and sacrifice and surrender.
yeah,
That reminds me of the whole thing that Lewis said. If you remember, C.S. Lewis had the little Christ. He said, but then if you read the whole quote, the whole quote is, but is that why this all was designed anyways? I think that was the whole purpose of everything. Was that not for the whole purpose of it all, is to make us little Christ? That's what that's God creating the heavens and the earth. So
that's another way to say oneness. If we're like Christ, we're little Christ, then we're one with
so
Christ.
big. That's so big. The opportunities that we have because of what God's up to it sometimes just floors me. I feel overwhelmed. I just feel like it's just more than I can think about. It's more than my finite, dumb mind can process.
That John 17 passage, may they be one as we are one. My goodness, he's inviting us into Trinitarian community, which is just mind-boggling. And then he goes on and says, so that the world will know that you sent me. So it's really evangelical, which frustrates me, which is on our topic. I don't want to get off that too far, but frustrates me with the church because it's evangelical to have this level of community. So we should really be focused on that because it's going to draw people in when they see this kind of community.
And oneness isn't a program.
That's what I was just going to say. Dad never had ABC, and here's what's going to happen at D, because it's all just the way it always works. It's always perfect. If anybody was the most honest guy around, it was Dad.
Yeah.
He knew that this, bottom line is, he knew this life was not set up to work.
Yeah.
But there is things that were set up that we can represent Jesus now and be that little Christ, which I think Dad was to all of us. And I think most people who met him.
Yeah.
They saw Christ in Dad. What does it mean? Larger Story's slogan line is to put Jesus on display by how we relate. How do we do that? Dad did that, gave us the message that my mom is doing that now with her community and just loves to that's the place she goes with it. And so what does it mean for us to do that now with each other? That I noticed that when we spend time together, it's not easy. I don't know if the word's easier, but I'm better at doing what we do with each other to other people.
Right.
I see it's just in motion.
You mentioned the larger story. What's God's up to? Who is God? The largest story context is relationship.
Right.
Or I swear
the ultimate ontology.
But the ultimate ontology is relationality. Your dad came up to me. I don't think I'd known him more than an hour. And he put his hands on my shoulder and said, would you say, Glenn, that the ultimate ontology is relationality? And I said, if you spell it for me, I will.
Yeah.
He goes through all the 7 questions, and you talked about some of the things, amartiology and soteriology.
Right.
And Yeah, and again, the sad thing is I could define those words when I was 5 years old, because
Yeah.
Dad did that with Kenny and myself, my brother and I. He would teach that when we were 5 years old, and it's so funny though. I look at both of your lives, and I know your stories, and our stories are so different, but it doesn't change what the end is, and it doesn't change the purpose, and it's all still about relationships, and it's all about putting Jesus on display, because that's the only access we have to the Father, capital F, right, in the New Testament. And we have that access, and that's what God's up to. And I go back to what we're doing together, which is why I thought I wanted to bring you guys in to introduce you maybe to the Larger Story family a little bit, but also because what we're doing at Larger Story now is what we're doing together. And how do we do that on a scale that allows Jesus to just be magnified and glorified? And that's
and who is Jesus? Jesus, as he incarnated, as we know about him and encounter him, is suffering and sacrifice incarnate. Who trains and prepares to sacrifice and suffer? Best case, we learn and we acquire some grace in accepting disappointment, failure, suffering, sacrifice, pain. I didn't train for my son's death. I was utterly unprepared, humanly speaking.
Right.
But I was well prepared by the Father.
Yeah.
You guys have showed me that. Life doesn't get easier. And again, that's why it's about finishing.
And it's entering into God's largest story, the only story that ultimately matters, controls.
How do our smaller stories become part of that? And I think together, what we're doing is allowing some of that,
just offering them, just saying, however you write today, whatever happens with that electrician that's waiting for me, glaring at me through the
where are the opportunities? Where are the opportunities?
Whatever phone call comes that disappoints or thrills or breaks my heart, it's acceptance. It's, I don't understand this. You do, Lord.
Right.
Well,
and we allow each other to say, I'm not too sure who he is right now. I don't think he loves me right now. And it's knowing that's a process that I'm going through right now, and it's not going to get stuck there. I'm going to hold on. But for this moment, I'm not doing too well. And it's okay to say that. We don't disrespect each other. We don't judge each other when we say those kind of things, because again, for me, the history of the Psalms, that's our heritage. It's okay to say those things. It's okay to say, I look at God and he's just Psalm 77. It's just, you're making me miserable, Lord. I don't even want to look at you. And God doesn't. I remember the first time I read that, I'm like, this Bible is going to blow up. You can't talk to God that way. Well, apparently you can. It's okay. And we talk that way in front of each other. And like I said, nobody runs out of the room with their hair on fire. I got to stay away from you because you're going to infect me. It's just it's a wonderful experience. And I was just thinking about your dad, Kep, because your dad was the bridge for me between AA and the church, because he came to the same place and level of honesty that I'd seen in AA from a whole different vantage point. I came to that level of honesty out of desperation, because if I don't start changing, if I don't start being honest about what's going on, then I'm going to die, because I'm going to go back and pick up again. I'm going to use again. But your dad came to that same place from a whole different angle, and it just made such a huge difference for me. To know that people in the church can get to that level of honesty and genuineness and reality, because I wasn't seeing it. I could talk about my alcoholism and my screwed upness in AA, but I couldn't talk about it in the church. I could talk about Jesus in the church. I couldn't talk about Jesus in AA, and I had no home.
Yeah.
And your dad really,
as my wife Angela is fond of saying, and Larry Crabb is the man who ruined church for us forever. Because from the time we went to the School of Spiritual Direction to the advanced school, the next step, and all the other stuff, and there's a level of communion, connection, relationship. There's an outworking of ontology of God's ultimate purpose here. Yeah, this is what God's up to, and I want more of it, and I got to go home now.
Yeah.
And I'm longing for something that most people haven't experienced.
Yeah.
And few will even come close to it. And I know we're running out of time, guys, and I could sit here and listen to stories about Dad all day long, because they just warm my heart and just remind me of who that guy really was and what he really wanted, which was for us to know Jesus deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hope this
and relate like him.
And relate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I hope
Exactly
this
right.
isn't overstating it, isn't blasphemous, but I think part of what God's up to is eschatology is for us to enter into and grow in relationships like the three of us have been blessed with.
Yeah.
And out of that flow into other people's lives.
What
Right.
happens with that? Yeah, I think that's the thing that we've got a conference coming up this weekend. We're really talking about the stuff that we get poured into. How can we also pour that out? And how do we get a chance to interact with this next generation of people that are growing up in a tough time? And
Yeah.
where we know how it's going to end. And it's not going to end pretty until the Lord comes back. And then we're in glory forever with Jesus. Guys, it's just been a blast just getting a chance to chat with you guys about this stuff and what's got up to. I think that I think to answer the question quite simply, like you just did there, Glenn, is he's up to what's happening in our little threesome group here.
Yeah.
That's what he's up to
There's truth, there's love, and it's all wrapped together in relationship, growing
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah. And
Oneness.
just one more thing real quick, because we sometimes it's been like I just bring the mess of the week to you guys on Tuesdays. That's how it's been going. But I think what's key is that one of us at least is going to remember that there is a resolution to anything that's going on with us, no matter how bad we feel, no matter how dark it looks. There is a resolution. There is a solution to this. There is an answer that's real. And I think that we haven't had one Tuesday where we all forgot that at the same time. One of us is going to remember.
Just remember, every message begins with a mess. Jesus came to this mess called human life.
Yeah.
Incarnate into this. How many even stories? I mean, Lazarus. You can't tell the Lazarus story until Lazarus dies.
Right.
You can't tell the woman of the well story until she's had 7 husbands and she's a mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't tell the Good Samaritan story until the poor guy is beaten up and he's a bloody mess.
Yeah.
When do we cling most fervently to the cross?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we know we're broken. The whole notion of brokenness and for us to realize that we're all a mess.
Yeah.
Even if we try to put on a good veneer, underneath everything, we're a mess. And so
part of God's larger story, his ultimate only story is, I'm the only one who redeems.
Thank God for Jesus.
You don't have to.
Amen.
We don't get a part in the larger story. If it's not for Jesus, we don't get a part in the larger story.
Yeah.
Even guys that grew up in a good Christian home are messes, aren't they?
Oh my goodness. Some of you guys have read my story in connecting. I always like to say I'm part of my mom and dad's character development as I was growing up, but God grabbed a hold of my life in a way that my dad was hugely instrumental in.
Sure.
And you guys are continuing to be instrumental in that. I just want to say thank you guys for this time together. And everybody, thank you for joining us on this Relational Spirituality podcast. We wanted to give you just a little bit of a taste of what we get a chance to experience and hopefully encourage you guys to move in these kind of directions, because what God is up to is huge. And it's everything. And so
Don't be afraid.
Join us
Enjoy it.
next week and we'll see y'all. Have a great day.
Yeah. God bless.
God bless.
If you like what you heard today, hit the like button just below. Then come back by subscribing to our podcast channel. For more resources on relational spirituality, go to our website at largerstory.com.